So let me make a few announcements before we dive in. First thing I want to ask is that would everyone please silence your cell phones right now. If your phone has a ghost and it turns itself back on, just go ahead and turn it all the way off. If you want, I can show you how to pull the battery out or throw it in the lake over there. Silence your cell phones now. Then, we are going to be led in prayer by Robert Mishner, one of our members. Following that, Paul Kelly will lead us in the flag salute. The flag is up here in the front on your right. So will everyone please stand at this time?
Our gracious Father in heaven, we gather to give you all honor and glory. First of all, thanking you for redeeming us, for the great sacrifice that you put on this earth. You've blessed us in so many ways, Father, and we've seen through our salvation history the times that we've all gone astray, and yet you've never given up. You've provided so much grace and so much mercy. And even giving us this great land in which we live, we're so blessed, and we thank you for it. Thank you for being in the minds and the spirits of our founding fathers. And we ask, Father, that you forgive us when we have gone astray, when we have misused the great gift that you've given us and all the gifts and blessings you give us. Please turn our hearts and minds towards you and towards the kingdom. And we'd ask, Father, now specifically that you would give us good memories. Thank you for our speakers today. Give them good memory. And give us ears to hear. And may we be open-minded and hear your wisdom through all that is said. We ask your blessing on this gathering. Thank you again, Father, for being ours. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Judges color and salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. We have a number of guests with us today who are not regular attendees. I want to welcome you to the weekly church services of Oklahoma Conservative PAC. If you're not a member of this congregation, we would invite you to pay dues and join. We have membership forms around on the tables being passed out. What we are about is what you see on the screen. Limited government, free markets, and Judeo-Christian values. We believe that the purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and private property, and that anything else is tyranny. Nothing in our bylaws mention the Republican Party or the Democrat Party or any other party. Some people talk about conservatism and liberalism. Some people talk about Republicans and Democrats. Here we believe in truth, absolute truth. That God thinks that it's wrong for us to kill each other and steal from each other, and that government should protect us in those areas. So we are not about the party, we are about the person. We are about truth and upholding God's truth by limiting government to its proper role to protect freedom and life and property. So consider joining us, and at the very least, let us have your email if you're not already on our mailing list. We'd like you to receive our weekly update, or you can join us on Facebook. So our program today is going to be a debate over State Question 777. The format will be as follows. Gentlemen, if you'd like to come to the front and take your seat while I explain what we're going to do, and then we'll do it. Speaking in favor of the question is Roy Lee Lindsey. He's the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Pork Council. Speaking against the measure is former Attorney General for the state of Oklahoma, Drew Edmondson. Roy Lee Lindsey will speak first in favor of the measure for 4 minutes. Mr. Edmondson will speak against for 4 minutes, and then we will have another round of 4 minutes and 4 minutes. That's 16 minutes total that we will allow them to speak. We'll cut them off after 4 minutes so that it is done in 16 minutes. And I already have a pocket full of questions, and I will be adding to those questions from you. And then with the remaining time, 20 or so minutes, I'm going to get through as many questions of yours as I can. We will stop at about 5 minutes to 1. We will quickly pass around a second straw poll ballot, and we'll find out if anyone's mind has changed after listening to the debate today. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Stephanie?
Could you clarify who's against and who's for?
Yes, I will set the stage by reading the amendment, and then I will clarify who is for and against. Since I'm making announcements, this will get forgotten and lost in the shuffle at the end. Let me make this announcement now, and that is for our program next week. Next week we will have Trent England here from the Trent England Show, also with OCPA, and he is going to discuss state questions 780 and 781, which deal with judicial reform. So if you don't know how to vote on those, come next week and we'll have a lively discussion about those state questions. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the measure up on the screen in a shortened format, just kind of the crux of it. Here we go. Let me read it for all of you together if you cannot read it in the back. It says, "The legislature shall pass no law which abridges the right to farm without a compelling state interest. Nothing in this section shall be construed to modify any provision of common law or statutes related to trespass, eminent domain, dominance of mineral interests, easements, rights of way, or any other property rights. Nothing in this section shall be construed to modify or affect any statute or ordinance enacted by the legislature or any political subdivision prior to 2015. This is what we are voting on. On our left is Mr. Roy Lee Lindsey of the Oklahoma Port Council. He will speak in favor of the amendment, why we should vote yes. Drew Edmondson on our right will vote no, you should not vote for the amendment. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Roy Lee Lindsey to speak in favor of the amendment for 4 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. In 2008, voters in California adopted Proposition 2, which was a measure that defined how livestock should be housed: hens, sows, veal calves. And following the adoption of this measure, egg producers in the state of California determined that they were going to be at a severe economic disadvantage due to the adoption of a new law. So they elected they're going to move their operations to another state. And they're going to start shipping eggs into California. This was not a food safety issue. This was purely about telling farmers and ranchers how they ought to care for their animals. The legislature in California determined that having the egg industry leave California would be detrimental, and that they didn't want them to be able to ship eggs into California from another state. So they adopted a state law that required every egg sold in California to be produced according to California's standards. Now, again, this isn't a food safety issue. This isn't even an animal care issue. This was about, hey, we've adopted a state question, and now we recognize what the negative consequence of that is, so we're going to tell an industry how they have to raise eggs. And at the end of the day, eggs in California went up significantly in price. And today, egg prices have come back down all across the country. But if you look today, egg prices are 40 to 50 cents higher in California than they are in New York. And the research tells us that they're 47 cents higher than they would be without the effects of Proposition 2 and the follow-up legislation. What we're talking about with right to farm is a constitutional amendment that would prevent the legislature from adopting language like followed Proposition 2. Language that did nothing except increase the cost of food in California. It didn't provide food safety. It didn't provide additional protection for animals. It didn't do anything other than tell farmers and ranchers how they ought to do their job and increase the cost of food for consumers. We look at right to farm, and when I try to talk to folks about right to farm, I want to tell you who's supporting the question and who's opposing the question, because I think those things tell you a great deal. If you look across the agricultural community in this state, you'll find the Oklahoma Farm Bureau, American Farmers and Ranchers, which is formerly Oklahoma Farmers Union, Cattlemen's Association, the Pork Council, the Wheat Growers, the Cotton Council, the Co-op Council, the Ag Business Retailers. Essentially every major sector of agriculture is supporting this state question. And the opposition predominantly has come from outside interest groups. Humane Society of the United States, the Sierra Club. They want to come in and tell you how farmers and ranchers should raise your food. They want to prescribe the practices we use on the farm that put the food on the table that you eat every day. And not because they think we're doing it wrong or that there's something wrong with what we're doing, but because they believe personally they should dictate to you what your choices are at the grocery store. Today you can walk in the grocery store, and if you want to buy cage-free eggs, look in the grocery store. I guarantee you there's a shelf that's got cage-free eggs on it. And you can pay the premium that comes with that. If you want to buy conventionally produced eggs and pay the lower price, allow the free market to work and consumers to dictate what they buy, you have that opportunity today. Right to Farm will protect that opportunity for consumers as opposed to our opponents who want to limit those opportunities and those choices for you at the grocery store.
Very good. Mr. Edmondson, 4 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I really appreciate the opportunity to come here today and visit about this issue. It is very important, and you are going to vote on it on November the 8th. Now, Roy Lee and I did not fill out those cards saying which way we're going to vote on it, because we know how we're going to vote on it, and we're not going to change our minds during the course of this conversation here today. I do want to mention the language that's in State Question 777, because the words right to farm aren't in there. What it says is the legislature shall pass no law which abridges the right of citizens and lawful residents. And that's the first thing you need to know. It applies not only to citizens, but also lawful residents. So anybody who's doing business in Oklahoma is going to get the protections of this constitutional amendment, whether they're a citizen of the state or not, which means Smithfield Farms, the largest hog producer in Beaver, Harper, and Ellis counties, and is owned by the Chinese, will also get the benefit of this provision. Okay, citizens and lawful residents of Oklahoma to employ agricultural technology, which is not defined, and livestock production and ranching practices, which are not defined, without a compelling state interest, which is not defined. Now, on compelling state interest, we kind of know what it is because it's the standard applied to fundamental rights that are protected by strict scrutiny. Your right to vote, your right to go to the church of your choice, your right to public speech. All of those rights are fundamental rights, and if government's going to tamper with them, they have to show a compelling state interest. And we are affording, if we pass 777, those same kind of fundamental personal rights protections to a business, to the agricultural industry, and not just small family farmers, which we all want to protect and which are rapidly disappearing in Oklahoma because of the large producers. We're affording them to JBS, the cattle buyer that's owned by Brazil, to Smithfield that's owned by the Chinese, to the huge poultry companies that are owned by people in Arkansas. You know, all of these companies will get the same protections as your church does. And I think that's uncalled for. You know, the preamble, this would be in the Bill of Rights for Oklahoma, Article 2. The preamble of which says all power is inherent with the people. The people have the power. But under 777, the people will no longer have the power as it pertains to agriculture. Now, I think what a person does on his farm is his own business, and that we shouldn't meddle in that unless what he does hurts somebody else. So when the hog producers out in northwestern Oklahoma had breaches in their sewage lagoons that got into the creeks and reservoirs and fouled the wells, we did something about it in the AG's office. And when the application of poultry waste in eastern Oklahoma started polluting the Illinois River and Lake Tenkiller, we did something about it. Things happen. in agriculture, particularly big business agriculture, that impacts on neighbors, that impacts on you, on the quality of your water, and we must preserve the right to take action when action is necessary. If 777 passes, that power will leave the people, leave the legislature, and be in the hands of judges who will decide what compelling state interest means.
Time.
Thank you.
Very good. 10 minutes, or 4 minutes. 4 minutes in favor, Mr. Lindsey.
I think Drew said something that's very important, and he talked about the power to the people. And if there's anything in my estimation here that is demonstrating the power of the people, it's that the people are going to vote on this. You're going to decide whether you want the legislature to continue to have a role in limiting what we do on the farm, or if you want to restrict that ability. The people are going to decide that. The legislature looked at this, they put it on the ballot. We passed this as a legislative referendum, 123 to 14. So when we look at this, and Drew's last comments, he talked a lot about pollution. And the simple fact is that we have regulations on the book today that restrict what we can do and how we can do it. And nothing in this state question changes those regulations. In addition, the reason the language is in this question at all related to compelling state interest was always our belief in agriculture that taking care of our natural resources is paramount for us. And it's paramount for the citizens of this state. You need clean water, I need clean water, my hogs need clean water. There's no way around that. We wanted the legislature to still have that ability that should something arise that they needed to address as it related to public health, welfare, safety of the state, clean water certainly should rise to that level. We wanted them to have the ability to do that. That's the only reason the compelling state interest language is in here, is we believe there were issues that could arise in the future that were important to us, that are important to all Oklahomans, that we wanted the legislature to still be able to do. Now, the other thing you're going to hear repeatedly throughout this campaign is the no side's going to talk about the Chinese owning Oklahoma. And I just got to be honest with you. We looked it up. USDA has a report that says how much land in Oklahoma is owned by foreign entities. And so to put this in perspective, according to USDA, 38 million acres of privately held farmland in Oklahoma. 370,000 acres held by foreign entities. 201,000 of that owned by the Italians. And the land where the counties where the Italians own land is wind farms. That's where the wind farms are. In the United States, according to USDA, the Chinese control a total of 190,000 acres. In the United States, not in Oklahoma, in the United States. This is a boogeyman that doesn't exist. This is just something to try to scare people and keep them away. If you look at the total amount of foreign-owned land in Beaver County, in Ellis County, Harper County, it's 785 acres. It's 785 acres. In the counties he talked about where Smithfield Foods is operating, foreign-owned land is 785 acres. This is a boogeyman that does not exist. Now you're going to continue to see it, and they're going to continue to go. I want to close with just this thought. You all said up front, you support free markets, you support consumer choice. If you're in favor of the consumer deciding what he's going to buy at the store, if you're in favor of the farmer having control of his property, then the right vote on this is yes.
This will be the final 4 minutes, and then we'll start questions.
Thank you very much. The people are going to vote on it. They're going to vote on it on November 8th. And the question is whether you, the people, are going to vote to shut the door on you, the people, voting in the future. Because that'll be it as far as agriculture is concerned, unless you come back and regulate agriculture with constitutional amendments. Because if you put it in the Constitution, it's okay. But if you pass a statute, it's going to be subject to challenge, the same as if you were interfering with somebody's right to vote or somebody's right to go to church. I don't know how many acres the Chinese have. Roy Lee didn't dispute the fact that they're the largest hog producer in those 3 counties. I don't know whether they do that on the number of acres that they own or number of acres that they lease. It's apples and oranges. You have numbers of acres that are foreign owned, and then you also have agricultural operations that are foreign owned that will be the beneficiary of State Question 777. This putting the freeze as of December 31st, 2014, all regulations that were passed as of that date remain in place. Well, we passed a law in 2015 that expressed concern about the honeybee population declining and commissioned the Department of Agriculture to find out why the number of honeybees was going down. This is important not just if you like honey, it's also important because they pollinate and help propagate species. So the Agriculture Department's looking into it. I don't know what they're going to find out. Intuitively, I would think it's a problem with an insecticide or a herbicide. I don't know that because I'm not a scientist. But if they find out that it is a pesticide that's being used in agriculture, what are they going to do about it if 777 is on the books? Because any regulation they adopt that conflicts with somebody's right to use the agricultural pesticide or herbicide of their choice is going to be subject to challenge under 777. So we're not going to protect the honeybees. The Vice President of the Cattlemen's Association has already admitted that the law they passed in 2016, this year, that says water is a compelling state interest would be unconstitutional under 777. So that's no protection at all. The protection that we have for our water and for our air and for the health and safety of our children and our citizens is our ability to react to something that's happening out in the field, either through the legislature or a municipal ordinance or a vote of the people through initiative or referendum. And that's the power we're giving up if we vote yes on 777. Thank you.
All right, we're now going to get some questions here from the audience. The first question is for Mr. Edmondson. How will more regulations drive farmers and ranchers off the land? With the shrinking number still on the land, how does this measure protect them or not?
Well, in the first place, most people have looked at the declining numbers of family farms and small farms, and the decade from 1990 to 2000 was particularly impactful. There's very little disagreement on the fact that they were being driven out of business by their inability to compete with the large producers. That was the problem with the small farmers, not regulation, because small farmers are good stewards of the land. In the 16 years I was Attorney General, I never sued a farmer. Never. It was not the small operators that were causing the problems, but both the environmental problems and the market economics problems are being caused by the larger operators. The passage of 777 will help them, but not the small farmers. And we'll see the decrease in the number of small farmers accelerate under 777, not slow down.
This question is directed to Mr. Lindsey. If passed, will this protection allow more antibiotic and pesticides to get into our food?
Absolutely not. Antibiotic use, pesticide use, all of those things are already regulated by FDA and EPA. Whether we like that idea or not is not relevant to this discussion, because all we can do here is control what the state legislature has the authority over. We can't limit what the federal government wants to do, and those things are already regulated by the federal government. FDA is already working on rules, and farmers and ranchers across the state are already working to come into compliance with additional rules and regs on antibiotic use. So there's absolutely nothing in 777 that will impact regulations on antibiotic or pesticide use.
Next question for Mr. Edmondson, dealing with food safety. You just mentioned the EPA and FDA, USDA. They already have regulations on farm products. When this question is passed by the voters, will the ag producers still be required to comply with EPA, FDA, and the USDA?
Of course, the agriculture producers will have to comply with any federal regulation, and they will have to comply with the state regulations that were on the books as of December 31st, 2014, according to the provisions in 777. However, agricultural technology and procedures and practices are not frozen in place. The agricultural industry is free to evolve. It's free to come up with new genetic modifications, new herbicides, new pesticides, and the regulations dealing with those, as far as the state is concerned, are frozen. We're not going to be able to come up with new regulations to respond to new procedures, new chemicals, new techniques used in agriculture. So, you got two choices. You can allow the state to have the flexibility to respond to those by voting no on 777, or you can invite the federal government to be more active in the state of Oklahoma, because government, like nature, abhors a vacuum. And if we're not doing it, the federal government will.
This next question is addressed to Mr. Lindsey. I might want both of you to speak to it, but let me ask the question. Right to farm affects more than just farmers and ranchers. It may have an impact on other businesses. What other businesses could be impacted? Could it have an effect on communities and public schools?
Could have an impact on communities and public schools. I don't believe it has an impact in terms of the public school system, if you will. But I do believe, as I shared earlier, that it has a dramatic impact on consumers, which is every Oklahoman. It's every business in the state. Everybody that goes to the grocery store and buys food will be impacted by the outcome of this state question. You can choose to preserve your choices at the grocery store, keep food affordable for everyone in the state, keep your options available to you, so you can choose a cage-free egg or a conventionally produced egg, or you can vote no, and we can watch the activists from out of state come into Oklahoma, just as they have all across the country, and start to restrict those choices. The side of choice in this question is the yes vote. It's the side that preserves the market, it preserves your choices as consumers. The no side wants to limit those choices. All you have to do is look at those groups and look at their track record, and they very clearly are set out to limit your choices and your options.
Okay, moderator's discretion. I would like you to answer that as well, given your experience as Attorney General.
Thank you. It certainly will impact on businesses. It's going to impact on tourism and recreation. You know, Lake Tenkiller used to be a destination site for scuba divers because of how clear it was. It is no longer. And the people who do the float trips, the people who sell bait, the people whose living and livelihood depend on fishing and recreation are very concerned about the quality of the water and our ability to maintain it if 777 becomes the law. That's why the Tulsa fly fishermen are opposed to 777. The Lake Tenkiller Association, Save the Illinois River, are all opposed to State Question 777. Communities are impacted also. They're concerned about preserving their water if their water source is remote, like Uchi and Spavinaw were to Tulsa, or Lake Thunderbird is to the city of Norman. They're concerned about their ability to protect those water sources for their municipal residents. They're also concerned about being able to protect well water. Rural water districts are concerned. And that's why the city of Oklahoma City has voted, their council has voted to recommend a no vote on 777. So has the village, so has Edmondson, so has Choctaw, so has Norman, so has Broken Bow. Tulsa's getting ready to vote. They are very concerned about their water. And it's not just because the Humane Society is opposed to 777. They've done their own studies. They know what the dangers are. And they're manifold.
Since you mentioned water, I grabbed this question here. Let's let Mr. Edmondson answer this question, then we'll give you two in a row, Mr. Lindsey. The question is, the no side is throwing out the defeat of this right will protect our water. How do the farmers and ranchers who are good stewards of our environment and water protect our water now?
You know, most of the experience that I had as Attorney General, I had some with hog farms out in northwestern Oklahoma. Most of it was with poultry operations. And the small farmers who who agreed at the instigation of the companies, the Tysons, the Simmons, the Peterson farms, to go to the bank and take out loans and build poultry houses, are totally beholden to the companies on how they operate. You know, they still have small farms, but the poultry operations that they decided to engage in are running their lives. The company decides how many birds they get, how many crops they get a year. They determine what the price is. They determine what antibiotics are used, what water sources are used. Every aspect of it is governed by the company. The litter belongs to the farmer. That's the waste. And so it's his problem what to do with it. And historically over the years, what they did with it was spread it on the land as fertilizer. And that's why it ran off the next time it rained and got into the creeks and then into the river and then ultimately into the lake. So it's not the farmer that chooses to pollute. It is the mechanics of that level of poultry manufacturing that inherently causes risk to water sources. That's what happened, that's how it happened, and that's what will happen if we are unable to regulate it in the future. We can use the old regulations if the legislature doesn't abolish or repeal them. It's the new processes and new chemicals that I'm concerned about, and our ability to react to those 5-10 years down the road, because a constitutional amendment is forever. It's not like a statute that you can go in the next year and amend.
This question is for Mr. Lindsey. Why should out-of-state interests fund the no side? How much out-of-state funding is involved to defeat this state question? What groups are working against this Oklahoma industry and citizens?
You know, I can't tell you how many dollars are involved. We haven't seen the latest campaign contribution reports. Mr. Edmondson could tell you where the funds have come from, but I know in the June report for the Stewardship Council, which is an organization Mr. Edmondson represents, the overwhelming majority of their funding, both in kind and cash, had come from the Humane Society of the United States. So when we look at the groups that are opposed, it's very clear. It's the Humane Society, it's the Sierra Club, it's PETA, it's organizations like that that want to dictate to you where your food should come from. I come back very clearly. To me, the simplest way for me to evaluate this question is look at what groups are supporting it and what groups are opposing it. And the groups that are supporting it are Oklahomans. It's the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association, it's Oklahoma Farm Bureau, it's Oklahoma Farmers Union, American Farmers and Ranchers, it's the Oklahoma Wheat Growers, it's the Oklahoma Cotton Council, it's the Oklahoma Pork Council. What's the key there? What's the common denominator? They're all Oklahomans. And if you add up the number of farm families that are represented in that group, it's in the hundred of thousands. It's you know, Farm Bureau I think says 40,000 farm families within Farm Bureau alone. 60,000 cattle producers in the state of Oklahoma. When you add up those numbers and you start thinking about who those folks are, they're Oklahomans. They're your neighbors. They're the folks that care about what's going on their farm from a natural resources perspective, from managing the water, from taking care of those resources. And that's who's supporting this question. And the other side, their money so far as we can tell, has all come from outside the state. And that ought to be what you need to know when you're trying to figure out which one of these is best for Oklahoma and which one's best for outside influencers.
On that note, could each panelist mention the top 1 or 2 donors for and against the measure, if you know that very quickly?
Well, on our side, if you go in and look, you're going to see Oklahoma Farm Bureau, you're going to see the Oklahoma Pork Council, you will see individual county Farm Bureau organizations, you're going to see the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association, you're going to see individual members of each of those organizations that have been individual donors to the campaign as well. So
do you know the top dollar amount? Who's the top donor for the measure?
I think it's Farm Bureau on the 4 sides. It's either Farm Bureau or it's the Oklahoma Pork Council. It's one of the two.
Mr. Edmondson, do you know who the top donors are against the measure?
Well, as far as my organization is concerned, the Oklahoma Stewardship Council, I think Roy Lee's correct that the largest single donor is the Humane Society of the United States, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller donors that have contributed. Yesterday in the mail, I got a check for $2,000 from a woman in Bartlesville that's opposed to 777. You know, but the large dollars have come from the Humane Society. But there's also an organization called Oklahomans for Food, Farm, and Family that's opposing 777. I don't think any of their money comes from the Humane Society. I think all of that is Oklahoma money as far as that organization is concerned. And in terms of organizational support, you know, if we had a measure to deregulate the banks, I would expect every banking organization to be in favor of it. So we got a measure to deregulate farming, I would expect every farming organization to be in favor of it. But in opposition, we also have the Oklahoma Conference of Churches, the Oklahoma League of Women Voters. We also have the Intertribal Council of the 5 Civilized Tribes. You know, we have lots of organizations and people and city councils and newspapers across the state of Oklahoma that have said this is a very bad idea, including Andrew Spiropoulos, who just wrote a column in the Journal Record mentioning the same problem that I mentioned in my opening statement. Judges aren't equipped to make these decisions, and that's who's going to end up making them.
This question is for Mr. Lindsey. Do you have any information or intelligence on where the proposal came from? Whose idea was it? Obviously the legislature passed it, but someone must have brought it to their attention. Do we know?
The language in our state question was written by Representative Scott Biggs. He said so on a number of occasions. We started working with Representative Biggs in 2014 when he introduced a House Joint Resolution with similar language in it. We revised that language a little bit in 2015, and the ag community came together in the spring of 2015 to push this through the legislature and put it on the ballot.
The next question is for Mr. Edmondson. 98% of farms in Oklahoma are family-owned. They're not corporate farms. Please talk about how this measure will affect each the same or differently. Talk about describe the difference between a corporate farm and a family farm and how they might be affected by this measure.
I will. I mentioned that briefly just a while ago. Over 90% of the farms are small farms. Over 90% of the production aren't. Over 90% of the production comes from the large hog operators, poultry operators, and large cattle companies. And it's the small number of the family farms that are in danger under 777. I would also like to mention that notwithstanding Representative Biggs' claim of authorship, this actually came from ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange, 20 years ago. Only the thrust of the ALEC measure was protection of farmers from nuisance lawsuits. And Oklahoma passed that. So what Biggs did was tweak it by adding the compelling state interest language, which the President of Farm Bureau now admits was a mistake, and by adding the cutoff of December 31st, 2014, which the Vice President of the Cattlemen's Association now says was a mistake. So what Biggs did was made it worse twice, but it came from ALEC 20 years ago.
For this question, I'd like each of you to talk for 30 seconds to a minute about this. Which position protects and preserves private property rights as they are being attacked by EPA and federal regulation? Is there any impact there that will help us against federal overreach?
I would say on the contrary, nothing in the Oklahoma Constitution or Oklahoma statutes can limit what the federal government does. But on the contrary, if Oklahoma abrogates its responsibility to regulate this industry, the federal government will be even more active than it is now. We'll see more EPA, more USDA action in Oklahoma than we've ever seen, probably since the Dust Bowl.
You probably will look a long way to find something that I'll agree with Drew on briefly, and that is that nothing in this question is going to limit the ability of the federal government to do what they do. Having said that, the reason we included the compelling state interest language in this question was so the state would continue to have authority to protect those things that were vitally important to the state. Clean water, clean air, those pieces. This is not a complete deregulation of the industry. It does not wipe out regulations on the ag industry, and contrary to what the other side says, it does not limit the legislature's ability to regulate things that are vitally important to the state. It limits their ability to regulate things that make us feel good about ourselves and pat ourselves on the back, like telling a farmer how he ought to care for his animals. But they don't limit the ability of the legislature to protect clean water. That's why we included that language. Mr. Edmondson mentioned the question that we passed this session that identified water as a compelling state interest. The reason the ag groups did that was representatives from the city of Tulsa came to us and said, we'd feel a lot better about this question if you would help us clarify that. We already believed water was a compelling state interest. We didn't think it needed to be clarified. But in an effort to work with municipalities, in an effort to work with citizens in other communities, we pursued legislation that they asked us to, that they helped us pass, to put that through. And I don't think it's actually legislation. I see it more as a declaration of legislative intent. And the court will have the authority to review that and determine if they wish to consider that legislative intent or not. But I've always believed, and everyone on the ag side has always believed, that the compelling state interest piece allows the state to continue to protect the environment, continue to protect water, and nothing in this changes any of that.
Was that both of you? I can't remember. I'm busy reading the next questions. This question is for Mr. Edmondson. Can you speak about the wisdom of putting a law in the Constitution rather than having it made law at the normal place in the Capitol?
Well, you know, there are some things in the Constitution that I think it was wise to put there. In the Bill of Rights, which is in our Article 2 of the Oklahoma Constitution, we have things like our right to vote. And we have things like your right to a jury trial if you get charged. And we have things like your right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. The kind of immutable rights that apply to citizenship. You know, these are the rights that we have because we live in the greatest country in the world and we're citizens of the state of Oklahoma. But the right to engage in techniques and technology and procedures that are not defined and have impact on neighboring farms and water and air and the health and safety of citizens, the right to do those things, unbridled, absent a compelling state interest, is not the kind of right that belongs in the Bill of Rights, not the kind of rights that belongs in the Constitution. You know, we did that with liquor. When we repealed Prohibition back in 1959, because Prohibition was in the Constitution, we put our liquor laws in the Constitution. And it's been a bother ever since 1959, trying to figure out how to have rational liquor laws when the provisions are constitutional. And we're going to have that same problem with agriculture if we pass 777. We may think something's a brilliant idea. It may not be compelling state interest, but something that we think the people think is a good idea, and we will not be able to do it because of that language unless we do it in the Constitution. So, you know, this new Article 38 is going to have amendment after amendment after amendment as we try to regulate this industry in the future.
All right, at this point I'm going to call an audible and I'm going to open it up for the last 10 minutes for some very quick questions. Audience members, address your questions to one person or the other, and you need to get your question out in one breath. If you have to breathe, you're done, okay? All right, here we go. Jerome Montgomery's going to have the first question.
This question is to both of you, gentlemen. If 7-7 passes, this looks like this will create a monopoly capital, thus killing the small farm operations. Will you address this, please, both of you?
We can't do both of them. You got to pick one.
Attorney General.
That is a great concern of mine, that the number of small farmers will continue to be pressed out of business by the large combines and operations, and we will see a change or an acceleration of what's been happening, and it's not good for small farms, not good for family farms.
Mr. Lindsey, I believe?
Yes, sir.
All right, The law speaks of the idea, the amendment speaks of compelling state interest. I'm worried about compelling neighbor's interest. The whole idea of you have a farmer, he's doing something, and let's say he's blowing over into his neighbor farm's yard, or his land, and the neighbor complains, and the original farmer says, your land is not a compelling state interest, so it won't go anywhere.
What this constitutional amendment does, is it restricts the ability of the legislature to enact new regulation. It doesn't impact neighbor to neighbor. There's nothing in this that says it limits what your neighbor can bring action against you for. There already are precedents. There already are state statutes on the books that deal with how you resolve issues between neighbors. Those things exist today and they're not changing. And nothing in this question changes what those things are today.
I have a question over here by the lake.
Okay, I'm a farmer rancher and I want to vote yes, but I have concerns about the term sustainability and how that, within that term sustainability, we're at a war between ideologies, between globalism and Americanism. We're watching the term sustainability come in and already push regulations upon us within air, land, water, and animals, making us be social and environmentally acceptable. It's already in the making. We're already being impacted by that. Will 777 stop sustainability? Because I know Farm Bureau and Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association both are taking us to the TPP. They want the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is global. They're already repealed the country of origin labeling.
Okay, how will this affect sustainability is the question. Who do you want to answer it?
Whoever understands what I said.
Okay, I need you guys to Rochambeau right now.
I'll take a shot.
I'll let you each speak. Keep it under a minute. Thank you.
Nothing in this question impacts anything that's going on globally. This is not an issue about how it impacts worldwide food supply, what's happening around the world, or any of those things. This is about what's going to happen in the state of Oklahoma, and whether or not you want the government to come in and tell you how you should care for your cattle, how you should take care of your crops, what you should be doing on your ground. If you want to limit that to only those things that truly are in the best interest of the state, the public health, welfare, safety, those things that meet that compelling state interest, then yes is the place to vote on this. If you want to continue to allow the government to come in and tell you what those practices ought to be on your farm and allow them to expand their reach onto your property, then no is where you want to be. If you want to limit their reach, yes is where you want to vote.
What 777 does is limit the ability of you to talk to your representative about what needs to be done in Oklahoma City. Because if it's in the agricultural arena and 777 is on the books, your representative, your state senator, is going to have very little, if any, ability to do anything about it. He would have to show, or she, a compelling state interest to pass anything in the future to regulate agriculture.
Okay, we're going to take a couple of more questions. Our President Emeritus Charlie Meadows has a question. We have passed around a second ballot and we'll send around the basket again here in a minute so you can vote again and we'll see if anybody's mind was changed. Now a question from Charlie Meadows.
I believe, Mr. Edmondson, if I heard you right, you indicated that lawmakers could rescind already oppressive laws, which I think many farmers feel there's too many. The other question to you is, for example, Labor Commissioner, we changed in our Constitution back and forth several times. There's nothing about this that's permanent. If this turns out to be bad, the citizens can turn around and repeal this at another time. Is that not correct?
That is correct, but they'd have to do it by constitutional amendment. That is correct.
Any other questions from the audience? Going once, going twice. Oh wait, I have a question. Okay, so up here it says it's not going to affect any laws already on the books and already on the books before 2015. Mr. Edmondson, does that give the Oklahoma Supreme Court any credibility or ability to say, well, we now can't touch those previous laws because now they have constitutional protection?
No, the 777 says nothing in here. It does not preserve them. It simply does not affect them, which means a future legislature would be free to repeal, modify, reduce the penalty, do whatever they want to do.
I agree with that interpretation as it is written. My question is, based on what we know of the Supreme Court, might they use it to interpret in a way that says we're not going to touch existing law, based on their progressive rulings in the past?
I would hesitate to predict what any court would do.
This is for the Port Council. So I am a small farmer. So far, the big ag has done nothing but smash small farms, and I don't see how either side of this does anything to help small farmers, since it's already illegal for ultra small farmers to be productive in any way. With USDA certified butchering and the food, having the milk inspections and all that stuff. I mean, there's no way for a super small farmer to make any money anyways. So how does your side help small farmers?
I think we've seen over time, and I'll give you an example. There's a small meat processing plant in Perkins that basically gave up killing livestock, processing live animals, because they couldn't comply with the paperwork and the regulations that were coming down on them as they go forward. And what we see is, as we look into the future, as we look at what's happened in Arizona, in California, in Colorado, we've seen the legislature come in and say, we're not going to allow you to raise hogs the way you want. We're going to tell you how to do that, how to care for your animals. State Question 777 will prevent the legislature from coming to you at some point in the future and say, you can't castrate cattle without a veterinarian being present. You can't dehorn cattle without a veterinarian being present. This limits the ability for the legislature to come in and do that unless they can show that in some fashion that rises to that level. We see this as a protection for all farmers of all sizes. When you look at the members of Farm Bureau and Oklahoma Farmers Union and all of our organizations across the state, they range from very small farmers to very large farmers. And all of these bodies are supporting this question, which means their membership supports where we're going. So I think that yes, it does provide protections for all farmers regardless. You may not have regulation impacting you today, but at some point down the road it's coming. And this is a measure to limit that ability to get to you down the road.
Nothing for past regulations.
All right, I'd like to give Mr. Edmondson...
It doesn't do anything to repeal past regulation.
I'd like to give Mr. Edmondson half a minute to a minute if you'd like to respond to that. That'll be the final word. And then, please, I want to invite you all to come back next week as we discuss judicial reforms, State Question 780, 781, and we're also going to pass the basket. Turn in your second ballots, and we'll announce those as we're all exiting. Mr. Edmondson.
I'm not a farmer, but I married a farmer's daughter, so I really did. Almost 50 years ago. In my discussions with farmers who have complaints about regulation, I won't say entirely, but almost entirely, the complaints are about federal regulations. Coming on the farm, telling them how to do their business. 777 will not protect anybody from federal regulations, and in all likelihood will increase federal regulations by creating the vacuum where the state will no longer be in that arena. So, and that's why I believe a number of small farms and farm organizations are members of the Stewardship Council. Because we believe in stewardship, we believe in small family farms and trying to protect them from being pushed out of business by the large operators. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please come back next week and thank our guests today.